When you say New York, most people think New York City, but most of New York State are beautiful forests, magnificent valleys, meadows, streams, rivers, and amazing mountains. And today we're going to explore all of that. We're going to look at upstate New York outside of cities. And I want to dedicate this video to a friend that has walked on. Dennis, this one's for you. But first, this is Latina Literati. And if you enjoy wonderful places, great books, interesting people from past and present, then this is the channel for you. As always, we want to start in the beginning. So the great Iroquois and Algonquin nations lived in what is now New York and further north as well in what part of Canada for over 10,000 years, at least 12,000 years. The great nations of Iroquois and the Algonquins lived in these areas. So for these 10,000 years, there were different tribes that eventually would form the Iroquois Confederacy. And these tribes were made up of the Oneida, of the Seneca, of the Cayuga, the Mohawk, and the Onondaga. And eventually there would be another group from the south that would also form part of the Iroquois Confederacy. The Iroquois Confederacy was made possible by the Great Law of Peace. This law of peace that for hundreds of years allowed people to live together in peace and prosperity was a result of three heroes to the Iroquois Confederacy. Apologize if I'm not saying these names correctly, but Diganawida, the great peacemaker, was one of the people who composed the Great Law of Peace, as was Hiawatha, the great chief, and also the Mother of Nations. Her name was Jigonsase. Again, apologies for my pronunciation, but I think it's really important to really look at a woman being involved in composing and writing the Great Law of Peace that was responsible for the Iroquois Confederacy living in peace and prosperity, that whole area of upstate New York and a part of Canada as well. When the U.S. Constitution was being formed and the first primaries were being held, one of the adopted processes was the caucus, and that came from the Iroquois Confederacy. So you had to convince everyone in the room that your point of view should prevail. And it wasn't until one point of view prevailed that then the caucus was considered concluded, and that point of view was taken up to the people for approval. So really rationality at its finest. What a beautiful, simple concept that you need to convince those around you that your idea is the best. I'm in a field, but it's not in New York. But I just wanted to set the stage because this is very much like New York, very green and very beautiful. So the first people who lead the Europeans was a man by the name of Giovanni da Verrazzano. That's where we get the name for the Verrazzano Bridge, one of the first people from Europe to arrive in New York. This was in the early 1600s, and the Dutch actually thought that they had purchased, for example, the island of Manhattan from the indigenous people, but very quickly the British said, no, you actually didn't. And pushed them out. So the British replaced the Dutch as the European power that is taking over the lands of the Iroquois Confederacy. This area was really important for the fur trade because fur was like gold, and the Europeans wanted all the fur they could get to export it to Europe. It was also important for agriculture, and this area, which originally the Dutch had called New Netherlands, the British called New York. And it was kind of acted as a buffer zone between the French in Canada and the British in the other colonies. So it was really important and strategic for the British. A lot of waterways, a lot of water trade in that entire area. As you start to go north, the first mountain range you see are the Poconos. And we were surprised to learn that this is actually all part of the northeastern Appalachian mountain range. And as you go further north, eventually you get to the Adirondacks, which are just magnificent. But this is a very, very long mountain range, which just goes through the middle of New York State. So as you're driving through all of these small towns, you really see so cute. It's one small town after another small town, and they have little antique stores, and there's some industry as well, and lots of farms. And so you see the farms. There are large tracts of land that are planting corn, and so corn is planted in April and then it is harvested in September. And so you see that in the fields all over upstate New York. So we passed by literally through the Chobani Yogurt factory. It's just, there's a road going right through the factory, and one side is the factory and they have a bridge over, like a tunnel bridge, and then on the other side is the factory as well. And I didn't realize that Chobani Yogurt was in this upstate New York. Also Corningware, you remember Corningware from many years ago? That is from Corning, New York. And even Elmers Glue is from a place called Elmsted, New York. So there is definitely some industry up north, but it's mostly agriculture and vastly beautiful landscapes. Incredible mountains, beautiful lakes and rivers, and just valleys, and in the morning you have like a mist and a fog. I was just surprised at how very beautiful the whole area is, and really highly recommend, if you haven't been to the Adirondacks, which is one of the largest state parks in the country, definitely recommend it. So green, especially in the spring. Everyone says spring is when you want to go. You definitely don't want to go in the winter. But highly recommend it. And now for my favorite part of the video, the book recommendations. James Fenimore Cooper wrote The Leather Stocking Saga. And these are stories that talk about upstate New York in the 1800s. Really get a picture of what it was like at that time, obviously from the perspective of a European that is, hunting and using indigenous scouts and having adventures. But it's definitely kind of central to American literature. It establishes storytelling on the American literary landscape. The second book I'm going to recommend is called Roscoe by William Kennedy. And it talks about the O'Connell machinery that took over and controlled Albany. Albany is actually the capital of New York. And so you had this political machine that basically controlled all aspects of New York, not unlike Chicago and other big cities. And so really interesting to look at that. And that's from the 1900s. So there's a book from the 1800s and a book from the 1900s. And then there's a lot of scary stories, Sleepy Hollow and all those things were in there, but I'm not recommending that because I like to stay with more historical recommendations. I hope you've enjoyed this insight into New York and some books from New York. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. This is a joint journey. We would love you to subscribe to Latina Literati, to share, like, and tell us what are the things you'd like us to talk about. What books are you reading? What are you doing in terms of your summer plans and fun activities? We'd love to hear from you. So thank you so much. And as always, mucho cariño, mucho salud, y mucho amor. Gracias.